There's a wasp that lays its eggs inside a living caterpillar. The grubs hatch inside and eat it alive, slowly, from the inside out, keeping it breathing as long as they can. The man who studied that wasp the most closely had once planned to spend his life as a country priest. His name was Charles Darwin, and this is the story of how his God quietly died. In 1831, Darwin was a directionless young Englishman of 22, no great scholar, fond of beetles and shooting. His father despaired of him, so the plan was the safe one for a gentleman's son. He would take holy orders. He would become a clergyman in the Church of England, with a quiet parish and time for his hobbies. He went to Cambridge to study for it, and there he fell in love with a book. The book was Natural Theology by William Paley, a clergyman who had died decades before. Paley made an argument so clean it felt like proof. Imagine you are walking across a heath, he said, and you find a watch lying on the ground. You open it. Gears, springs, a design, all working toward a purpose. You would never believe the watch made itself. A watch implies a watchmaker. Now look at the eye, the wing, the world, infinitely more intricate than any watch. Surely they too imply a maker, a designer, God. Young Darwin found it irresistible. He believed it completely. Then the offer came that changed everything. A place aboard a survey ship, the HMS Beagle, sailing around the world. He went as the gentleman naturalist. The voyage lasted 5 years. He saw the living earth at full volume, jungles, fossils, volcanoes. And on a cluster of bare islands off South America, the Galapagos, he saw small birds whose beaks differed from island to island, as if shaped slowly by where they lived. He came home with a question that would take him 20 years to dare to answer. The answer was natural selection. The idea is simple and merciless. Living things vary. More are born than can survive. The ones whose small differences help them live, and pass those differences on. Repeat for 1,000,000 years, and you do not need a designer to explain the eye, or the wing, or the wasp. The watch, it turned out, could make itself. It only needed time, and death, and enough of both. In 1859, he finally published it, On the Origin of Species, and Paley's beautiful proof began to come apart in his hands. Here is what people forget. Darwin did not stop seeing the beauty. He never did. The last sentence of The Origin is not cold. It is almost a hymn. There is grandeur in this view of life, he wrote, that from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been, and are being, evolved. In a later edition, he even added 3 words after breathed, by the Creator. He took the wonder he felt and reached once back toward God. He regretted it. He admitted he had used the old religious language to soften the blow. The grandeur was real. The Creator he was no longer sure of, because the wasp would not leave him alone. In 1860, a year after The Origin, he wrote to a friend, the American botanist Asa Gray, and he put the whole crisis into one sentence. I cannot persuade myself, he wrote, that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created the Ichneumonidae, the wasps, with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars. This is the oldest wound in all of theology, the problem of suffering. If God made everything on purpose, then God made that, on purpose. Paley looked at nature and saw a watch. Darwin looked closer and saw a torture chamber running for 100 million years. But notice how it happened. Not in a thunderclap, not in a single night of rage at the sky. Years later, in his private autobiography, Darwin described it himself, and the words are unbearably quiet. Disbelief, he wrote, crept over me at a very slow rate, but was at last complete. The rate was so slow that I felt no distress. It was not an argument won. It was a tide going out, so gradual that he only noticed one day that the water was gone. And all of this was happening inside a marriage. In 1839, Darwin had married his cousin, Emma Wedgwood. Emma was warm, clever, and devout. Her Christian faith was the floor she stood on, and she could feel her husband drifting away from it towards somewhere she could not follow. So she wrote him a letter. She begged him not to let the habits of science, weighing only what can be proved, close off the part of him that could believe. And she named her real fear underneath it, that if he died without faith, they would be separated forever, that heaven would have her and not him. Darwin kept that letter for the rest of his life, and at the bottom of it, in his own hand, he wrote a few words found only after he was dead. "When I am dead," he wrote, "know that many times I have kissed and cried over this." That is the whole tragedy in one line. This was not a man gleefully burning down heaven. This was a man who loved a believer and could not believe with her, and grieved it. Then came the loss that the world has never stopped talking about. Their eldest daughter was Annie. By every account the light of the house, tender and funny and adoring. In 1851, when she was 10 years old, she fell ill and would not recover. Darwin took her to a spa town, Malvern, for a water cure. It did nothing. She died on the 23rd of April. Her father was so broken he could not bring himself to attend her burial. A week later, he wrote a private memorial of her, and it ends: "We have lost the joy of the household and the solace of our old age." Now, the popular story goes like this. Annie died, and Darwin's faith died with her. The grieving father turned from a God who would take a child. It is a powerful story. It may not be true. Careful historians point out something inconvenient. Darwin's faith was already nearly gone by 1851. In all his millions of surviving words, he never once said Annie's death destroyed it. His own account was the slow tide, the disbelief that crept. The truth is quieter and somehow sadder. By the time the worst grief of his life arrived, he no longer had a heaven to put her in. The faith was not killed by the loss. It was simply not there to comfort him through it. What he did say plainly was that he could not stomach one Christian doctrine in particular. The teaching that the good people who did not believe, which would include his own father, his brother, his closest friends, would be punished forever. Darwin called it, in writing, a damnable doctrine. His family found that line too raw. When his autobiography was published after his death in 1887, they cut it out. The world did not get to read those words until 1958, when his granddaughter finally restored them. And yet, hold this carefully, he never became what we would call an atheist. In 1879, a stranger wrote to ask him directly, did he believe in God? Darwin answered that he had never been an atheist in the sense of denying the existence of a God. The honest word for him, he said, was one his friend Thomas Huxley had recently coined. An agnostic would be the more correct description of my state of mind. Not a man who knew there was nothing. A man who confessed he could not know. Odd, uncertain, and unwilling to pretend either way. So here is what Darwin was left holding, at the end. A world with the wasp in it, and the orchid, and the human eye, and his daughter's grave. Cruelty and grandeur running on the same engine, with no one he could find at the wheel. He could not call it good. He could not stop calling it beautiful, and his doubt brought him no triumph and no peace, only the quiet ache of a man who had loved a believer and outlived his own faith. Tonight, you live in the world he handed us. You already know about the wasp. You have seen the cancer ward and the famine and the child who did not make it. And you have also stood somewhere, a shoreline, a face, a piece of music, and felt the grandeur he never lost. The question Darwin leaves at your feet is not, is there a God? It is harder than that. It is whether you can hold a world this cruel and this beautiful in the same two hands, and not let go of either. Darwin never resolved it. He just kept walking his gravel path, looking at the tangled bank, refusing both the easy faith and the easy despair. Maybe that was not a failure of nerve. Maybe that was the most honest thing a person can do. If you are still sitting with the wasp and the orchid, subscribe and keep walking the path with me. We are not done with the hard questions. Next, we go underneath all of it, to the strangest question there is. Not why is the world cruel? Why is there a world at all? Wait and hope.